Hey everyone, and welcome back. In this episode, we're going to be drinking a hazelnut decaf coffee with me, your host and partner in conversation. And in this episode, we're going to dive deep into the topic of confidence. Because when you're just starting off in your career journey, it's very likely that some of the paradigms in place will test your confidence, especially if you're not a male in a male-dominated industry. So let's get started. So how many of you consider yourself confident? Let's actually look at this in terms of an example. Maybe it's a situation you've been in or a situation you're going to be in the future. So let's say you're in an interview and the interviewer asks you, can you talk a little bit about your strengths and your achievements? And in this situation, how many of you would actually talk about your achievements the way that they have been played out? Or how many of you would actually downplay your achievements? And I ask this because the likelihood of you actually downplaying your achievements is higher if you're a female rather than if you're a male. And this has a lot to do with confidence. So, what is confidence? To me, confidence is being honest with yourself. It's not being afraid to be who you authentically are, and it's being comfortable in your own skin. So, in the interview example, you can see that the woman would downplay their experiences or their achievements because they lack a little bit of assertiveness, right? But is this just a problem that women face from within, or is it some sort of a systemic issue? It's actually a bit of both. So, first, it's internalized misogyny. And second, because us women have so much heavy programming and conditioning placed on us by society, it's really difficult for us to see ourselves for who we really are and to even recognize that we are capable and we have skill sets out there. And then when we do something out of the ordinary that's not really considered normal for a woman, we actually think that we're some sort of an imposter. Let's talk about my podcast journey, for example. So, they were really upset and they thought that it was very disrespectful for me to work independently instead of working with them, right? They wanted me to be complacent and they did everything in their power to lower my confidence. One of them even went to the extent where they said that I only had 50 followers and that I wouldn't be able to grow. And if we just think about that statement, let's think about how ridiculous it is. Like, of course you're not going to have 1 million followers to start. Like, it's only something that grows over time, right? Now let's think about what would somebody do in my position if they still weren't able to recognize their power, and by power I mean their authenticity and knowing their skills and their capabilities, right? So in that case, they would probably sound something like this. Oh my God, thank you so much, X institution. I wouldn't be able to do this without your institution's support. And I want to specifically talk about the word support here. What does the word support mean? When they say that they're actually here to support you, what they mean is that they want you to remain in your comfort zone so that you're unable to see that you can push boundaries and exceed your own expectations. So they'll cover all the aspects to ensure that you can remain in your comfort zone. Talk about how crazy it is that these institutions say to the public that they care so much about EDI and women empowerment, and then these are the things that are happening behind the scenes. We could also take a look at how this fuels imposter syndrome, right? Because when you're told you need support constantly and constantly, what you start to think is that there's some sort of a void in you, that you're lacking something and that there's actually something wrong with you that only another external figure can fill. Aside from my example, let's look at some of the other more common things that also fuel imposter syndrome. For example, a really big one is the gender wage gap, right? Because currently men get paid more than women, and that makes women feel like, that they're not deserving of more money and that they have to put in some amount of work and still they're not capable of getting the same amount of money. If an industry is more female dominated than male dominated, you'll notice that the wages itself are a lot less. For example, the nursing industry. When the nursing industry was filled with males, the wages were a lot higher, but when it transitioned and more females started dominating, the wages actually declined. There's also microaggressions that fuel imposter syndrome, and then something that's really prevalent is the lack of good and positive role models. And when I say this, I don't just mean are there female representations, are there female mentors out there? I mean, are these female mentors actually teaching you the right things to disrupt and change the industry? And this is why I say that, because a while ago I actually read an article that was written by a female, and she was talking about how it's important for women to fit in. And I really disagree with this concept because fitting in is actually the opposite of authenticity. And it's actually not empowering at all. Because empowerment is giving somebody the space to shine their own light. And when you fit in, you're telling them that they have to fit X, Y, and Z constraints, right? So something you want to keep in mind when you're, even talking to your mentor, ask yourself, what are they teaching you? Do you really agree with that? Is there some part of you that's unsettled? And if there is, are you going to shift who you are, or are you going to overcome that and kind of explain your perspective of things? And I think that's where we need to move towards. Something else that I really want to talk about is the underlying feelings behind imposter syndrome. So it's really common that you feel anxious, you feel nervous, or you feel afraid before starting something new, right? And these are all feelings that are actually very normal to experience. But it's because they're not normalized in our society that suddenly we feel like an imposter when we have them. For example, when I was initially starting to launch video episodes for my recordings, I was a little bit nervous, right? Because it was initially just audio, and then I was like, okay, I'm a little bit nervous because now I'm going to be on camera. And just because I'm nervous doesn't mean that, I'm an imposter. It just means that it's a new experience. That's it. I also really want to talk about something else that's really prevalent in the professional world that really impacts the confidence of women. And that's the concept of a glass cliff. Sure. And a glass cliff is basically when somebody puts you in a situation where failure is almost guaranteed and they put you in it on purpose in order to lower your confidence. And here's an interesting example that I actually heard about a while back. So, in the name of equity, diversity, and inclusion, somebody promoted a really junior employee to the position of a project manager when she wasn't actually qualified for that role 100%. And it was a role that nobody actually wanted because of the high failure rates and the amount of struggles that come with this position. When the female takes the role, she doesn't quite successfully complete it. So what do you think happens at this point? Well, I think it's really clear that it really affects the person's career projection, it affects their reputation, and it also lowers their confidence, right? Because again, it just works to affirm that women cannot perform high-stake jobs. So what needs to happen to ensure that women are more confident in the workplace? You can actually look at this in two levels. So on an individual level and on an organizational level. Let's start with the individual level. So on an individual level, it's really important to reflect on some of the programming that has been placed on us by society so that we can identify where our limiting beliefs precipitate from. For example, perfectionism is a big one, right? Is it true that you really need to be perfect in order to start something, or is it possible to learn as you go? And something else that this also ties into is, are you self-aware and do you have emotional intelligence? You need all of these skills in order to determine if somebody's just trying to like set you up for failure or if they're actually genuine. And I recommend that you do listen to episode 6 if you want to learn more. And lastly, something really major on an individual level is ask yourself what your confidence is fueled by. Is it fueled by external sources or is it something that is fueled from within? Because the thing is, if your confidence is based on the fact that another person is telling you that you're capable and that you can do it, then it's very likely that you actually lack a little bit of confidence. But if you know that you can do it, if you're completely alone in a situation and you're given a task and you know that you can believe in yourself and do it, then that's when you know that you're really confident. So now let's look at things on an organizational level. So on an organizational level, it's actually really important to be aware of the tasks that you give to people, especially if they're like fresh in their careers. And there's actually a study out there that shows that if you give somebody a task that's 4% more challenging than the skill that they have, it'll actually increase their success rate and also keep them more engaged while performing the task. Secondly, if we just look at the glass cliff example, we can talk about how when you're considering equity, diversity, inclusion, it's not just about considering how many people are you promoting to that job that meet the equity, diversity, inclusion number, but are they capable of their job and do they meet the qualification? And lastly, something that I think is super important is that instead of treating failure as something that reflects a person's ability, it's important to start considering small failures as learning opportunities. So to end off, I'll leave you with some inspirational words from Barbie, who says that the most beautiful thing you can do is be yourself. And that's a wrap, folks. Until next time.
This program is meant for entertainment purposes only. It is not meant to replace any educational programs or represent a professional coaching program. All examples provided by the author and speaker are purely anecdotal and are not meant to represent any institutions or companies in affiliation with the creator.